Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. We have a great show for you guys today. We have author and journalist Howard Blum back on the show. He is the writer of When the Night Comes Falling and a Requiem for the Idaho Murders. He's written about the Bryan Kohberger case extensively. He's got some inside knowledge. And today we're going to talk about the plea deal. Was he shocked? Was he not? We're going to talk about what was some of the reasons why he believes Bryan Kohberger made the plea. We're going to talk about Bryan Kohberger's family and implications they may have had. We're also going to talk about the possibility of Bryan Kohberger being Papa Rogers. So much more. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. That way you're notified every time we go live. Tomorrow night, we'll be going live with Dr. Vona, and we're going to be talking all about everything that we learned today. So without further ado, let's get into it. And good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. Author, journalist, Howard Blum of the book, When the Night Comes Falling, a Requiem for the Idaho Murders. Welcome, Howard, again to the show. How have you been, my man? It's been a while.
I've been good. I've been keeping busy. This case has filled me with surprises and a lot to write about.
I can imagine. There's been a lot of new updates that have come in with this case, with the Bryan Kohberger case. I just recently saw you in another documentary on the Peacock. How was that experience for you?
Well, that was shot way back in November, which was a lifetime ago. I can barely remember it, but it was fun. The people were very nice. It was a good experience. So no problems. A lot of documentaries are coming out now. Be interesting to see if anyone makes a dramatization of the Kohberger case. Then who would play Kohberger, how they would do it, how they would deal with the facts. That'll be the next hurdle challenge out there for filmmakers.
Yeah, I can imagine that's going to be something that is on the horizon relatively soon. I mean, it seems like a lot of content is being created about it. A lot of noise is coming out. I think even more noise is destined to come out at the end of the month once this gag order is finally lifted. But first and foremost, a plea deal happened. How surprising was that to you?
I was totally blindsided. I have to concede. The timing, it just didn't seem as if it were coming. The prosecution had just won two big victories. They've been able to take the alternate perpetrator theory, and the judge ruled that we can't bring that into the court. He said, what you have is not evidence, but allegations. This won't stand. And the Kohberger team even went to the point of mentioning four names, four individuals, really libeling them in this motion, which has still been sealed to the court. So that was thrown out. Then the court ruled on the alibi defense a little earlier than that. They said Kohberger's alibi, that he was off in the woods at 4 a.m. stargazing on a cloudy, freezing night, was, in their words, quote, no alibi at all. So they didn't have the alibi defense. They didn't have the alternate perpetrator defense. They really had nothing. Perhaps they could raise some doubts in the minds of some jurors about the surveillance videos, the triangulation, the science of the DNA, but his life was on the line. And then some of the reporting I've done, and I write about this week in Airmail, what I think ultimately changed Kohberger's mind, because he had been, according to the reporting I've done, approached earlier by Ann Taylor and her team about a plea deal. And he had spoken with his mother, Marianne. And Marianne, for whatever reason, said, no, you shouldn't pursue this. Maybe she didn't want to confront the possibility that her son was guilty. Maybe she just thought maybe he could win the case on the doubts that could be raised by his team. However, after the Dateline episode aired, if you remember back in May, one of the key revelations in that program, and I played a very small part in that program, but I was involved in trying to put together a little bit of the research, and I appeared online on the show as a talking head for a bit, droning on and on as I do here. But one of the key revelations that their investigators got was that a 54-minute phone call had been made by Kohberger 2 hours approximately, about 6 a.m. after the murders, to a phone registered to his father. It seems that during that call, he was, according to the reporting I've done, speaking largely to his mother. What was said on that conversation, only Kohberger and whomever he was speaking to know for sure. But it now seemed clear to the Kohberger family that this call was going to be brought up by the prosecution, and that the Kohberger family members would have to go on the stand under oath and answer pointed questions about what was said. And that might put them perhaps in an incriminating legal position about what they knew, how they acted.
Mm.
So, as this was explained to Bryan, and the way I heard it, he didn't feel anything akin to guilt, but he did feel a certain sort of, in his own irrational way, remorse for what he'd gotten his parents into. So, to help them avoid having to go on the stand to face this questioning and possible legal jeopardy, and to save his own skin from a firing squad, he then told Ann Taylor that he was amenable to a plea deal, and then she went to the prosecution. Why the prosecution caved at this point is an entirely another story that leaves me a bit perplexed.
Yeah, that one, as far as the prosecution goes, that one was something that I was kind of shocked about as well. And even more shocked is the fact that they didn't get anything out of him. They didn't get the murder weapon. They didn't get his story. They didn't get an actual confession. What do you
It's
think of
very
that?
troubling. It's very, it's a very expedient, coolly pragmatic decision on the prosecution's part. But when you look back at it, you can see there's been a whole theme of honorable men in Idaho making decisions to, let's shrug our shoulders, move on, and get on with life. Let's try to forget this. Go back to the beginning. You had John Judge was ready to move the case up to Boise. And then as soon as he moved the case, he could have followed it up to Boise. He said, enough already. I'm going to retire from the bench. I've had enough of this. Then you had Chief Fry, who ran the investigation that identified Kohberger. After 7 weeks, he goes on national TV and he tears up, announcing the arrest. And then, not long after that, he's had enough. He resigns from the police department in Moscow. He now is in Washington State as police chief. Then you have the Judge Hippler, who went first day when he takes the case. The first thing he says going into the courtroom is, I'd like to say I'm happy to be here, but why begin with an untruth? And most dramatically of all, perhaps, or symbolically of all, you have the University of Idaho, the president, who decides to bulldoze the murder house, demolish it completely, as if people will just forget about it if it's not there, as if everything can go away. And I think this ultimately, let's move on, that sort of feeling was prevalent among the powers that be in the state. And when it came to Bill Thompson, who's an honorable man, a distinguished prosecutor, I think he just, in my opinion, made two calculations. One, you go into a trial, you're throwing the dice, as every veteran prosecutor knows, you could lose. You don't know what seeds of doubt can be planted in a juror's mind. You don't know if there's going to be a rogue juror. Here he was getting this murderer put away for life. But I also think hand in hand with that went Thompson's belief that, gosh, I've had enough of this. 2.5 years, a 3-month trial ahead of me. I just don't have the appetite for this fight. And I think he decided ultimately, very expediently, that he'd rather spend the summers fishing.
I don't disagree with you there. I think you're absolutely right. I think it was too quick. I heard that the families got notified like on Friday, and by Sunday they were told that it was going to go through. So over the weekend, he thought about it, got nothing out of it in return. I think you're absolutely on point there. Hey guys, real quick, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, TST GRP LLC. They have a great e-bike. It's called the TST R002 20-inch, 1500 watt, full suspension, moped style electric bike. You guys won't be disappointed with this bike. I've had it for a few days now. It's an amazing amount of fun. It comes equipped with 65 to 100 miles as far as your range goes, top speed of 32 miles per hour, has a torque of 90 newtons, phone app accessible, and has a max load of 450 pounds. So whether you're on the road, enjoying a good time, just cruising around, or getting on some of these, dirt roads, this is the bike for you. Make sure you check it out. Discount code, get $100 off when you use discount code DT Show. Link is in the description and will be in the comment section. So you mentioned his mom and his dad and the possibilities of what they might say for this 54-minute phone call. But Bryan Kohberger's dad was en route with him for 4 days, is what it sounds like. What, if anything, do you think would have come out of their travels?
I think that was another part of Kohberger's decision to accept this plea deal. his father would be put on the stand and ask pointed questions about what happened during this car ride. And I discuss that in great detail in my book. I try to get into it because here you have this father, 68-year-old father, is concerned enough about his son to go out to Washington State, travel across country, take an airplane to get out there. Money's tight in the family. They've been bankrupt twice. As soon as he gets there, from what I heard, he sees his son is in one of his states. He knows how Bryan can be, how problematic he can be. So they get in the car. They're sitting shoulder to shoulder in this Hyundai Elantra. And Michael Kohberger, the father, has to know that every cop in the country is looking for a white Hyundai Elantra. He's in a white Hyundai Elantra. His son lives 9 miles from the murder site, and he's a problematic young man. He's putting 2 and 2 together. And then to add to all this, not once, but twice, he's stopped by the Indiana state troopers for traffic violations. And his mind is, roiling around. He can't quite make the leap yet. And during the course of this 4-day journey, he can't quite reach the destination that his son is this monster, but he's approaching it closer and closer. And every time he gets to it, he backs away. He just can't believe this about his child. And yet at some level, he already knows it's true.
One of the things that I've uncovered here recently is that Michael Kohberger purchased that plane ticket that flew out on December 11th out of Philadelphia on December 10th. I mean, it was right after the Bolo comes out. Right after that, he's buying a plane ticket. He immediately flies over. Now, he gets to Seattle, and apparently there's a windstorm, and he can't fly into Pullman. He has to fly into Spokane. But he doesn't get there until after 9:30 the next night on December 12th. December 13th, they're leaving fairly early. I mean, that tells me that they're trying to get that car out of there. In your research and studies and stuff, have you ever come across maybe perhaps there was more than just a suspicion that maybe Bryan Kohberger may have committed this crime once that Bolo came out?
I think that many people in the family were concerned. I think even after they had the facts, it was just too much for them to deal with. I mean, one of the interesting parallels in this case is, what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. And, I got a B- in psychology in, freshman year, so I'm no authority. But, sometimes events are too large for us to deal with, too large for us to grasp. And you see that in Dylan Mortenson, her behavior. How else can you explain that rationally? It's not rational behavior. You see that with the Kohberger's family, that they can't quite take what is happening and go to the logical conclusion. The only one who reportedly I say, does this is a sister who sees her brother when she's home for the Christmas vacation, cleaning up the car obsessively, sorting his garbage into plastic Ziploc bags, and she tries to confront the father. And when she's asked the father, in effect, do we have a problem with Bryan here? Is there something we should be worried about? The father listens, and to what I heard, he allegedly just turns his back and walks away. Again, this is just too large. When some people go to the doctor and they get a really grim diagnosis, they just don't want to confront it. They pretend that it just didn't happen or that things will work out. And I think that's what the family was doing.
It's interesting. You had written in your airmail articles, and I think even in the book, that FBI were onto Bryan Kohberger relatively early before Moscow got word of Bryan Kohberger's name on December 19th. I know the FBI claims that they weren't involved in the Indiana stops, but were they already watching him by then?
I was told from sources there that they were. Again, they deny this completely and vehemently. Here's the FBI's official timeline. On approximately December 12th, they take over the case from Othram. Othram has now taken the DNA on the button snap of the knife sheath, and they can't really break it down. They can't really follow it to its logical conclusion. They just don't have access. So the FBI says, let us take it over. And they take it over. They're now in charge. And here's what the FBI does. Here's how they crack the case. They go into genetic websites, genetic inventories that are prohibited from law enforcement, from investigating. And this has come out in pretrial motions. This is not being debated. This is why I believe that the FBI was trying to cover that up, trying to keep quiet what they had done in their zeal to catch a murderer, going into protected websites. That's why they were onto them. They did not officially give what they called a tip. That was their word, a tip to the Moscow police task force until December 19th. That would be when Kohberger was already back in Pennsylvania. I don't believe that's actually what happened. But again, there's a gag order on the case now. In the days and weeks ahead, this gag order is going to be lifted. Will it be lifted before the sentencing? They tried to get it lifted last week, but the prosecution, the defense, and the judge all said, nope, let's keep it in place. A new motion was just filed by concerned newspapers to try to get it lifted before sentencing. I'm not sure it'll fly. I certainly hope it does. But we'll see. I mean, there's more to this case to be told, and it's going to come out in drips and drabs in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what kind of confuses me a little bit about it is if the FBI took over on December 12th, they would have had to have inserted this DNA into the system. The system would have had to have done some sort of work and then spit out a few names. And it's not like it picks out a name. So either it connected to somebody very, very close to Bryan Kohberger, or maybe perhaps something else happened there. I know that you had written in a book once, or in the airmail articles once, that the Goncalves family had reached out to somebody and that there was a grand juror who said something referencing a tip, and that Steve got pretty close and that he was told to back off because that came from an FBI tip. Now, without going into all the Steve and that stuff, but what was the substance of what happened in grand jury and what was apparently Steve trying to get in touch with?
I mean, Steve is an interesting character in this whole story. To my mind, he's sort of a hero. I see Steve, what Steve is doing is something triumphant. He's, someone killed his daughter and he's just not going to let the murderer get away with it. He has no faith in the police. Now he has no faith in the prosecution, and he's out playing detective himself. He's advancing the case. He's sharing the evidence on Kaylee's phone. He's going from house to house in the neighborhood, trying to find things out. He's interviewing possible suspects, boyfriends, whatever. To me, that's a man that I admire. I mean, he's been through hell, and the way he's dealing with this hell, and it's a hell he'll never escape from, is by trying to do what is right for his daughter. So he hires a private investigator. As was reported to me, they get someone in a prison who has a tip. This turns out not to be true. After a good deal of money is spent, they spend a lot of time there. But he then gets someone else that they're looking at. And he writes, he's about to contact this person. His lawyer receives a letter, allegedly, telling them to back off. This is a tip that came in over the FBI tip line. This is a protected witness. Who this was, I don't know. Only Steve knows if this is true. Will he come forward and tell this at some point? I think perhaps he will. Maybe he'll deny that it happens. Maybe he'll say the reporting is fallacious, or maybe he'll expand the story. But he is determined, I believe, and honorably, to get to the bottom of things. He needs an answer for a sense of, I think he feels, for completeness so that he can move on. I don't think it'll ever happen to know, why did they choose my daughter? Why did they choose this house? Why did this happen? And right now, he's left just with questions. I think questions are, that remain are a real interesting and challenging part of this whole story. It leads for it to be such an unfulfilling conclusion. And if one considers what questions should be asked, well, I think we have a good template for questions. I write about this in Airmail this week. When Bryan was a graduate student going for his master's at DeSalle, he sends out a questionnaire he posted on Reddit and elsewhere on the internet, asking prisoners, how did you plan this crime? What made you do this crime? How did you get away with it? How did you leave the scene of the crime? These are all the questions that Bryan first posed. I'd love to have someone pose them to him and have him answer these questions. And I think the future will be, Bryan will be in his jail cell, and other forensic psychologists, the people who he aspired to becoming a leader in that field, they will come to him and they will ask pretty much the same questions he posed in his master's thesis program. And now perhaps we'll have answers only then as to what happened and why.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a huge part of, I thought honestly a huge part of why he pled guilty was that so that he can correct his story, and I put that in quotations, his narrative, because had he gone through with the trial, been found guilty, he would have had to keep up the facade that he wasn't during the appeals and stuff, so he wouldn't be able to correct the narrative until after all that was done, and that could have been decades. Real quick,
and you also talk about his narrative. I mean, he's going to put out a very self-serving narrative. Any story we hear from him is going to be filtered through the lens, the lens that portrays him in his own mind as a sort of criminal genius, as a forensic psychologist who's smarter than anyone else. He's going to be, in his own warped way, the hero of this story. And it'll be interesting to see when he tells his story, did he leave the knife sheath behind by accident, or will he claim that he left it behind as a calling card? This is, my symbol. And we'll never know, whatever he says, if that's really what happened.
Yeah, you're right. Going back real quick. So December 12th, 13th, FBI takes over. This is the same time that Bryan Kohberger is on his trip. There's been a lot of rumors and stuff that have gone out, and I've heard a few things that at some point, Bryan Kohberger's sister actually tipped off the FBI. Now, if they're on to him before the IGG comes back, or let's just say they had it a couple of days, do you think there's a possibility that the reason they were on to him on December 12th, 13th is because of a tip, maybe, perhaps?
I have never heard that. I mean, it's possible. I heard that they cracked the IGG by going into a protected website. I do know that Kohberger's sister, I've been told from reliable sources, is writing a book. She wants to tell her side of the story. I mean, she's in many ways a victim of this too. So that will come out perhaps down the road. And maybe she will speak out even now once the gag order is lifted. But how the FBI put all the pieces together is a mystery. Ann Taylor went before the court many times and said, I've been in this case for over 2 years, and I still don't know how it all came together. And the FBI and the prosecution was very glad to let it remain nebulous. Why? I just don't know. And you have one theory, and it might very well be true.
Yeah, that was one of the things that just kind of sat weird with me. Like, all right, they're on to him. You're mentioning that they didn't take over until December 12th, but they already kind of, I remember Cy Ray mentioning that they had put out a warrant for his phone during a hearing to try to locate where he was, but they already were on to him. I mean, it's all kind of somewhat confusing. And so the
timeline is very nebulous and it keeps on changing. And that's one of the perplexities of this entire case.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Now, you mentioned earlier that Ann Taylor had approached Bryan Kohberger. They've made and talked about a plea deal, but they had made so many different comments. They talked about how it was an honor to be his attorney, that he's 100% innocent. What do you think about those type of tactics, retrospect, knowing that they had some sort of inkling that he was guilty throughout the majority of this time?
I can understand under the U.S. Constitution, you have to defend everyone. But I'm still taken a bit aback by Miss Masseuse, for example, goes up there and said, it's an honor. I consider it an honor to be able to defend Bryan Kohberger, knowing what she must have known. Also, Ann Taylor, at the plea deal, she's asked by the judge, one of the pro forma questions is, have you received all the discovery you needed? And one of the things she's filed motion after motion after motion about is, I have not received a necessary discovery information. But now she's asked a question, and for a moment, you can see this if you watch a tape of this, she pauses, and it's almost as if you can read her mind. She's thinking, do I really want to say I've received everything? But if I don't, then this whole thing is going to fall apart. So there's a beat, and then she says yes, rather meekly. So I think they're playing a lot of disingenuous lawyerly games. At one point, Ann Taylor very candidly files a motion where she says that trying a trial is really about story building. That's her word, story building. and each side tries to build the best story, which is a pretty cynical approach. It doesn't really talk about justice or facts. It just tells about who can tell the best narrative that will persuade gullible jurors. And that's what she's saying. And I found that really shocking.
Yeah, they've definitely had some statements throughout this entire process that was shocking to me. You know, you even brought it up. They were gonna be ready to tell or to tell the court in the world of 4 other people may have had something involved in this, knowing very well that they were going to be pleading out or possibility pleading out.
And even more than that, not they filed a legal motion. It's been redacted. They named those 4 people, and I can't believe they knew that or felt in their hearts or in any legal way that those 4 people were guilty. Yet they exposed their people, these 4 clearly innocent people, to public scrutiny potentially, and put their names out there. That to me was reprehensible.
Yeah, no, I agree. Do you think that was maybe their tactics as lawyers, or do you think maybe Bryan Kohberger could have been pushing them to do something like that?
I think that was their tactics as lawyers. I mean, they were trying every Hail Mary pass. I think that's why I say I think Ann Taylor, and again, I don't know this, she hasn't spoken to me, there's a gag order, but I think she realized that her client was guilty. When you have your only alibi, you're keeping him in jail for 2.5 years. If you thought he was innocent, you'd be trying to get him out. You shout his alibi from the rooftops. The judge has to go to her not once but twice over a 10-month period to try to get the alibi released in court. And when they do release it, this is contrivance that he was out stargazing on a cloudy night at 4 a.m. As the judge said, that's not an alibi. She has to know. She has to feel in her heart that this is not adding up.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You know, another person who had a similar set of mindset that you've written about is Katherine Ramsland, Dr. Katherine Ramsland. She stated that she wanted to believe that he was innocent I think it was an interview with Brian Enton. But when the alibi came out, and she's like, I know it's not an alibi. He knows it's not an alibi. It seems like she's open to writing a book now and open to writing a book with him.
Well, I think she's more than open to writing a book. When I first wrote about her, I said she had called the family. Afterwards, I said it was within days. She said it was not within days. Obviously, she knows what was happening. So I stand corrected. I also said that she had emailed Brian, or there'd been an email exchange while he was at Washington State University. She says there was no exchange. She says, and I have to accept this as truth, the last time she had any communication with him was in the spring of 2022, which was just about the time, coincidentally, when he ordered the knife from Amazon. He ordered the knife in March. So she was in communication with him then, and she said she saw no red flags. She said in response to my original article that she was only contacting the family out of concern. It was a good-hearted gesture, and that's terrific. A professor who cares so much about her students, even after they've left her flock, that she's reaching out to his family. However, Brian Enton, after the sentencing, Brian, who's a terrific reporter, asked her the main question everyone wants to know, would you want to write a book about this? And she said, I've been thinking about that for the past 2.5 years. And 2.5 years, I would think, by my timetable, by my mathematics, would include the time when she first called the family. So I think that's been on her mind from the beginning. She has, been, to my mind, my opinion, my subjective opinion, a bit disingenuous in describing her involvement in all this. She wants to maintain that she's a family friend and the lofty academic above the fray, which perhaps is what she's feeling in her mind, that's what's motivating her. But also, she's admitted candidly that she wants to write about it. She wants to. This is a story, and I don't blame her. Believe me, if I could get this story from Brian in jail, I'd be there too. I'm interested in getting it, but I just think she's been a bit disingenuous in trying to describe her feelings about this whole thing. I mean, at one point, At one point, she tells Brian Enton that she wonders if she had any complicity in sending him off into the world as a forensic psychologist. When I asked her about this, if she felt any guilt or whatever, she said no, and I've never said anything to that that would reflect that, which seems to be a contradiction too. But again, people, when you're being interviewed, you have to respond on the spot. You're putting me on the spot. You're not always thinking as sharply as you can. Perhaps in retrospect and retrospection, she saw things another way.
No, I agree. And you bring up an excellent point that he did purchase the knife around the time that they were corresponding. And I think that's the term that she used, that they hadn't had a correspondence since he had left and that he hadn't emailed her since his arrest. Kind of leads me to believe that he was emailing her unprovokedly and she not responding to during the time that he was at WSU, because I just don't understand why she wouldn't say there was no emails back and forth since he left. Why
maybe she misspoke. I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to be precise on an interview, but I think this is a story she wants to tell, and I think she'll have to deal with her own role in it. She has said, and she has told me that she's writing a memoir, and this will be a chapter in it about her student Bryan Kohberger. It'll be interesting. She, in a sense, I don't think has any culpability in all this. I just think she's been disingenuous in explaining her relationship and her role as a professor and a friend and a writer hunting down a story.
Understood. Yeah, and I don't think she had any culpability as well. And to a certain extent, I see her as probably a victim of Bryan Kohberger's manipulation. If he was able to get over her, learn some things, figure out some of the investigative tactics that would have gone through, maybe even perhaps gotten certain ideas, that was not her intent. That was him manipulating the situation, portraying to be somebody interested in the field so that they could go out there and protect and service and investigate crimes, not commit them. And
you don't know how Bryan Kohberger's progression of his mind, of his madness worked. He might have gone into there as a diligent student, hoping to become a forensic psychologist. Dr. Ramsland writes that fantasy leads to someone wanting to experience the real thing. And in the course of his studies, he spent 6 years studying criminal justice, 4 undergraduate, a year at master's, and his time at Washington State. He might have evolved. He might have changed. We all change over 6 years. So she might have been too far away from him to see what she refers to as red flags. But they seem to be waving strong in his mind because, again, while he was in his senior year at DeSalle, or his graduate year at DeSalle, his master's, when he was in communication with her, that she concedes he was in communication with her, that was when he ordered the knife.
That's true. He ordered the knife. He ordered a balaclava mask, a backpack, all while he was out there. He also started that Reddit survey, all too late too. It started at around that time in March, right before his graduation. He starts the DeSales Reddit survey that goes out there. One of the things that I've recently found out is that one of his studies in DeSales was Elliot Rodger. And a lot of people have been looking at Bryan Kohberger as possibly being Papa Roger. You have any insight on that? Have you ever heard of anything like that?
The people I've spoken with, and again, the theory is that he was Papa Roger. But I don't know. I wouldn't say it. I would have put it in print if I was convinced that was true. But I would not be surprised, and I suspect he was. He was the one posting that. And it's sort of interesting. He will from jail. He will play Papa Roger again when he writes his book, giving the inside story.
Yeah. A lot of the questions that you were bringing up earlier that you wanted to ask Bryan Kohberger, or that people should ask Bryan Kohberger: thoughts, feelings, how did you answer the victims? These are questions that were in the DeSales Reddit survey, and also questions that Papa Roger was asking on Facebook.
That's why part of the reason why I believe And I think most of the people I've talked to familiar with the investigation believe that he was Papa Roger, and in law enforcement too.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes sense. You know, the guy was very argumentative, and he got some things right. So you would expect that guy to be gloating, and yet he disappeared right around the same time Bryan
Yeah,
Kohberger did.
yeah.
You know, other people have come out. You know, we've saw the Peacock documentary, and there was another young lady who was a student with Bryan Kohberger mentioning some things that have happened. Um, we've heard from you about Nayoung Ko. How many other students have stories similar to these two individuals when it comes to Bryan Kohberger?
I think we'll see. We'll get the answer to your questions in the days ahead. When gag orders released, as time passes, people feel ready to talk. I think we'll hear more from friends of Dylan Mortenson, of Bethany Funke. I don't know if they'll come forward, but I think people who know them will come forward. Maybe their parents will come forward. I think there's a lot out there. This story will come out in drips and drabs, and I think a lot of our questions may not be answered, but we'll have versions of answers.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. You know, I know that the gag order is destined to get dropped in a couple of weeks, and I think that there's going to be a lot of things that people are going to be looking into. I know I am. I've already sent out my FOIA request, so I'm waiting as well. I'm in the wings. Are you going to be doing anything more with this case?
Sort of. I said months ago that I was moving on, and I keep on getting pulled back in. As I said, I have a piece coming out in airmail this weekend. I'll pay attention to the sentencing, but I think largely I'll be writing about something else. I've signed to do another book, but who knows if I uncover a good fact, if someone hands me a good fact, if someone calls me with a tip, I think I'll be eager enough and curious enough to try to track it down. This has been a part of me for the past nearly 3 years now, and I'd like to get to the bottom of things.
Well, I might have a good fact for you after the show
Good,
that I'll
please.
share with you. That's
I'm
something that
eager.
I found. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Howard, it was great talking to you guys. Make sure you go and check out his book, When the Night Comes Falling. I have my hard copy here at Rec Room for the Idaho Murders. I know there's a paper book out there. I'm going to link it in the description. There's a little bit more onto it. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a new afterword where I share some thoughts that happened since the hardcover was published.
Awesome. Make sure you guys check it out. If you haven't checked it out, it's well written, gets you behind the scenes and a look into a lot of the hard work that Howard has done. Howard, do you have any final words for everybody before we call it a show?
And just in the sense that, we think we're at the end of the line with the sentencing. I would suggest that there is more out there that's we're all going to hear in the weeks and months ahead, and that will be a pretty interesting time. We're in for some interesting times, and I look forward to it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much, guys. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. You guys know what to do. Thank you.